You've probably heard this so many times, but I am supposed to say it at every event, so please forgive. You only have to hear it just a couple more times. So, I'm Jerry Carboni. I'm on the Brattleboro Literary Festival Authors Committee and Library Director, and I'm pleased to see you today. This year's festival is presented by Building a Better Brattleboro. It's made possible by generous support of our sponsors, the Howat Foundation, Marlborough College, Vermont Arts Council, Vermont Humanities Council, and Vermont Public Radio. Festival is run entirely by volunteers, but has very real expenses, so we encourage you to make a donation if you can, and we have some envelopes, and there is a donation box at the front entrance of the library. There is no photography or recording without the express permission of the festival. However, we are recording this for later broadcast on Brattleboro cable television, and it will be on demand as well. So if you like it and you'd like to send the link to friends and neighbors and distant lands, please do. At the end of the program, or sometime in the next few hours, please pick up an evaluation and give us your feedback on the festival. And remember to turn off your cell phones, in case you have them on, so we don't have extraneous ringing in our ears for later. So we have a very special event for you this afternoon. We have a husband and wife writing duo, Lily Koppel and Tom Folsom. So I will give you their introductions. I was introduced to Lily Koppel's writing when I read a review about her book, The Red Leather Diary, Reclaiming the Life Through the Pages of a Lost Journal. I ordered the book for the library and read it myself. Thinking that she would make a great presenter here, I invited her, and she came. And this was about, 3 or 4 years ago? Something like that. Yeah, maybe 2009. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Red Leather Diary. We have it in our collection, but I'm sure they have it here for sale. It's an incredible story of a serendipitous discovery of an 80-year-old journal, which Lily found in a city dumpster. It was written by a teenager, and it gives us a glimpse of city life by this really precocious individual who did not skip a day of journaling from 1929 to 1934. It's a great story, so I encourage you to look at it, read it. You'll be really impressed, and the aftermath as well. Now in 2013, Lily continues her investigative journey with a publication of a New York Times best-selling book, The Astronaut's Wives Club, which one reviewer calls a cross between Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff and Norman Mailer's Of a Fire on the Moon. But it's from the perspective of the women behind the spacemen that you've read about. Lily has written for the New York Times, New York Times Magazine, the Daily Beast, the Huffington Post, and Glamour. I'll give you a little intro to her husband now, Tom. Tom Folsom is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Mad Ones, Crazy Joe Gallo and the Revolution at the Edge of the Underworld. His new book, Hopper, A Journey into the American Dream, tells a story of actor, director, artist, and art collector, which I didn't know, Dennis Hopper. When I read the book this past summer, I wanted to know how Hopper, from the U.S. heartland and the personification of youth rebellion, as in his role as Billy in the film classic Easy Rider, which I'm sure you've all seen, could become this arch-conservative at the end of his life. It's a complex story, but after reading Tom's book, I've come to understand it somewhat, I think. But also, I was also impressed by the eerie connection to Brattleboro. Yes, there is a connection to our town here. Hopper was fond of quoting Rudyard Kipling's If, which goes, "You can treat triumph and disaster the same because they're both imposters." And you may know this, or you may not, that the first symposium by the Kipling Society, Kipling in America, is going to be, it's the first in America, will be held at Marlborough College on Monday and Tuesday. So I thought that was serendipitous. So I'm wondering if Tom might like to show up and do a paper on Hopper and Kipling, maybe next year, but I think it'd be an interesting idea. Tom is also a writer, director, and producer of documentaries, and his work has appeared at Sundance and on the A&E and Showtime, and he lives also in New York City, of course. So please welcome Lily and Tom.
Hi, so nice to be here. Thank you all for coming out. We've never actually done a joint talk, so the ongoing joke for the last couple of weeks is, so what are we going to talk about?
What are we going to talk about?
And finally we said, well, we've both written books, why don't we just start there? And then, I just encouraging each other to feel at liberty to chime in.
Absolutely.
And the other has forgotten something essential. So Tom, take it away.
Okay, well, I figure what we're going to generally talk about today is nonfiction, especially something, historic nonfiction, and how to sort of tackle it creatively, which is, I think, something that Lily and I try and do in our books.
We're always reminding each other not to write books that sound like Wikipedia entries, that a nonfiction work has to be much more than just a recitation of facts.
Yeah, and I think, I think our covers do a pretty good job of showing. I mean, we always try and make these books sort of like, you get it sort of when you see it. And so for Lily's, when she came up with the idea, she was flipping, well, I'll let her tell the story, but, it was just like, wow, the astronaut wives, you can't go wrong with the astronaut wives. It's sort of like,
well, we were on a big Mad Men kick at the time, really. And my first book, as Jerry was saying, came out of this very serendipitous discovery of a young woman's 1930s diary found in a dumpster outside of my old apartment on the Upper West Side. I'd come out one morning, Tom's heard this story so many times, but there was this dumpster. It was filled with about 50 old steamer trunks. And I had just started working at the New York Times as a news assistant, which I always describe as the devil wears Prada without the Prada. This was like bow ties and men in typewriters in the corners still. And I ended up climbing into this dumpster and going through the upper layer of trunks. And among the flapper dresses and an old coat from Bergdorf's was this old diary. So the joke was whenever we'd go around the country, I'd be talking about the red leather diary, people would raise their hand and they'd say, well, at the end, well, what are you working on next? Have you found anything in a dumpster recently? I was like, Tom, why do they think I go crawling through dumpsters all of the time, But I think it's always, a challenge, especially to come up with a second book topic. And this actually came out of the Hopper book. We went to go meet a source of yours at a reading, and I bought this big coffee table book, and it was a re-release of Norman Mailer's of A Fire on the Moon. And one Saturday I was sitting around paging through these wonderful pictures of Neil Armstrong planting the flag on the lunar surface and Buzz Aldrin in this NASA marshmallow spacesuit, and turned a page and saw the astronaut wives and basically said to Tom, who absolutely loves the right stuff, has anything ever been done on the astronaut wives? And you said?
I said, no, I don't think so. So anyway, so this is what came out of that sort of discussion. And so part of the trick is that, and you have this concept of your head in your head, it's going to be this sort of, as Lily puts it, Mad Men goes to the moon. I think the cover really accurately reflects it, but your writing has to sort of fit into this vision that you have that gave you the initial inspiration of like, wow, this is going to be a great story. And so this sort of lends itself to, sometimes a little more stylized writing than just as we're sort of rebelling against this straightforward Wikipedia, just strictly the facts and sort of, I don't know. I mean, especially with something with biography, which really tends to be, doorstops. That's not really the stuff I read. I mean, and that's fine for those who'd like to read that. That's not really my thing, and that's not what got me excited about Dennis Hopper's story. I mean, I saw him as this. I saw him sort of like an American. I saw him as first of all like a literary figure. I mean, he seemed like some sort of American Don Quixote, going out and he's off to go chase the American dream, and that ended up being sort of the subtitle in this thread throughout my book, which was Dennis Hopper. He's like on his Easy Rider chopper, and this guy's going to go and he's going to go, like they tried to in Easy Rider, find out what's going on in America. And so from that, it sort of led to, I just sort of imagined like sort of a book that's almost like a ballad, like the prose should sort of, guide you through this really sort of wild, manic journey that Hopper really thrusts himself into. And so I thought it was really important to make the writing reflect that. So,
because you had a few editors who kept on disagreeing with you, and Tom had to keep on reminding them, this is a Dennis Hopper book. This is not the Warren Beatty biography, you know, like it
well,
has
not even
to
Warren
be.
Beatty, but like, you know, like,
Or
I don't know, like, you know, I don't know, like some sort of,
Robert Redford.
yeah, Redford,
Something more
or,
responsible. This was
you know,
going to be
Jimmy
a wild
Stewart, you know.
ride.
I mean, this isn't, yeah, this isn't Jimmy Stewart here. And so the passage I'm going to sort of read to maybe illustrate this, I mean, I'd gathered the information for this stuff when I was sort of at a point where I wasn't sure where to take the book at all. And so, like, I did the worst thing, which is I started to, like, really research Hopper's, like, backstory. By backstory, I mean, like, I went back to the 1600s, and, like, and I was like, where, I mean, it's not like, I mean, do we really need to know who Hopper's great-great-great-great-grandfather was in the Grand Hopper tradition? But you know, I kind of felt this guy in his own weird way. I mean, his story is definitely epic, so I was like, all right, well, where did this guy come from? I mean, I thought his story was quintessentially American.
Was
And
this after you moved to Taos?
Yeah, this was after I moved to Taos, as a matter of fact.
He got an artist fellowship where, of course, you can't bring your spouse. So Tom just one day told me he was like off to the desert, you know, to really understand Hopper, because Hopper spent most of his drug-addled 1970s
Yeah.
at the Mabel Dodge Lujan house in Taos.
Yeah, and that's where this picture was taken, in Taos in the desert. But yeah, I really got into it. I found all this great stuff, like really going back to the 1700s, and I wrote, you know, this is going to be the beginning of the book. This is going to be great. And then finally, I was like, this is going to be awful. I'm going to start the book with this, and it's going to be just dragging everything down. So I kind of cut it out, and I just left it aside for a while, and you know, just focused, you know, did my job, focused on the main story, the story that I always wanted to tell, this sort of battle thing. But this kept creeping up, and I was like, you know, where am I going to put this? And then finally, I realized where to put it. And so I'm going to read this sort of section of you know, Hopper's great lineage. At this point in the story, Hopper's been through all the really juicy stuff that's in here, almost all, you know, not excluding his high-profile tabloid divorce at the end of his life. But, you know, he's clean and he's sober now. You know, he's doing the talk show circuits, and everyone wants to know about the wild days of Dennis. And
So he's basically come back from the dead.
he has. He has. I mean, this great Hollywood comeback, and so this is where I put this stuff in. We'll see if it works. But this chapter is called Hoppers of Yore. Okay. What is the story of Dennis Hopper's life? Asked Charlie Rose. Well, Charlie, if you really want to know, it began with the tenacious Hopper stock, a line going all the way back some 400 years ago to the Hoppers of yore, stuck in the bogs of Britannia. This rugged clan dreamed of that American land beyond the imaginary horizon, publicized as a fantastical dreamscape of soaring eagles, fish that looked like St. George's dragon, lusty soil bearing 3 sorts of plums, and other such wonders detailed in the day's best-selling true tales of a swashbuckling Captain John Smith, including the cock and bull one about him being saved by the luscious 13-year-old Indian princess Pocahontas. So, the restless, nervy Hoppers set sail for the shores of the New World. As the president of the San Diego Genealogical Society, Hopper's mother, Marjorie Hopper, had traced the line back to the head branches of Deep River, where George Washington later owned land, and one Black Grove Hopper abided by the Hopper family crest, a subject faithful to his king as the safety of the kingdom, until hellfire and brimstone he could take it no more. Pulling himself out of the mire of civilization, Black Grove headed for the hills of East Tennessee. Drinking deep the untainted waters of Lick Creek Baptist Church, he had a vision of a string of frontier churches glowing through the darkness like theaters of the soul. Pushing deeper into Appalachia, Black Grove braved cussed highwaymen and ornery mountain folk in the hollows of the Cumberland Valley to forge his peculiar American dream with his itinerant preacher son in tow, whose God-given talent for performance earned such a reputation that the Barberville Mountain Advocate plainly asked its readers, Who that ever went to hear him was not fascinated and chained to his seat, however protracted the discourse, until the last word was uttered, notwithstanding his uncouth gestures and repulsive drawing intonations? Then one Thomas Hopper was born in 1825, the year Senator Thomas Hart Benton told colleagues in the State Senate chamber to rally America toward the uncharted West, evoking an exotic land of ivory, apes, and peacocks. There lies the East, Senator Benton cried. There lies the road to India. Well, Thomas Hopper didn't make it all the way there. Instead, he settled in Missouri, leaving his great-great-grandson Dennis to blaze trails on the westward path and reach for himself that fantastical land. And so, like those hoppers of old, an imaginary dreamscape filled young Dennis's head, and one day, when he was just a tyke in Kansas City, Missouri, where his family had moved for a stint before relocating permanently to California, Dennis Hopper tried depicting these fantastic Technicolor mountains of his dreams during children's Saturday painting classes at the Nelson Art Museum. And this was the replacement for those matinees he used to go to as a young boy in Dodge City, Kansas. And then one day, the renowned Thomas Hart Benton took over the class. Now, this wasn't Senator Benton, who had rallied the nation long ago towards manifest destiny. This is his great-nephew, the artist who packed up his paintbrushes and hit the road in a rickety Ford to see for himself what was out there. He didn't find India, but he did find a fabled land of a quintessentially American art, where the artist had to be a fighter and wrestle his vision down. "What are you doing?" asked Benton, his pomaded hair jet black, looming over this young hopper. "I'm painting this rock and this river and so on," said 12-year-old Dennis. "You're little, so you might be too young to understand what I'm about to say to you. But one day, you're going to have to get tight and paint loose." Now, if this little squirt, if he wanted like fantastic blue mesas like the ones that Thomas Hart Benton's epic mural about America, well, what he needed to do is he needed to go over to Kelly's Westport Inn, the local watering hole, get himself a stiff highball and get behind the canvas and plow. Well, it was too bad because the boy was doomed to rot in the land of extravagant idiocy, and we're talking about Los Angeles here. But yet drink he did. "I was doing half an ounce of cocaine every few days," Dennis told Charlie Rose. "I was drinking like a half a gallon of rum and then a couple of bags of coke to sober up. And that wasn't getting high, that was just to keep going, man." Or, really more pharmacologically correct, Dennis was officially drinking half a gallon of rum with a fifth of rum on the side, 28 beers, and snorting 3 grams of cocaine a day. Hopper let all of this out in his god-awful, staggering multitude. And now that he was confessing his sins, America was suddenly paying attention after almost 20 years of writing him off. He was invited on the talk shows after the 1987 Oscar race for his tour de force as Frank Booth in Blue Velvet and his role as Shooter, the drunken dad in Hoosiers, for which he was nominated for the Best Supporting Actor. How he got out of this whole thing is an amazing thing, marveled his old pal in Asian, a man named Michael Gruskoff. Dennis should have been gone the way he was doing it. Not many people came back like he did, and he came back twice. He started building up a career. He was making a new reputation because of people who were starting to get into art in Hollywood and wanted his advice. He started to do things that were not adolescent. People started appreciating him for the talent that he had. I haven't seen many people who knew the town like Dennis did, who knows how to use the town. Now, Dennis, he knows how to use those calling cards. And he played the game, and he played it as good as you can get. And he had the rest of his life now, you know what I mean? Hopper's dramatic Hollywood comeback, one of the most awe-inspiring in industry history, was featured in Vanity Fair 3 years after he returned to Hollywood from New Mexico. On the cover, a sophisticatedly gray Hopper held a cigar and stared down America for the feature, "How the Mad, Bad, and Dangerous Movie Star Came Back from the Dead and Took this Town by Storm." I mean, when you sit here today, this is Charlie Rose talking, and he was stumbling to take in the full breadth of Hopper's winding journey. Now, it's the best of times for you now, right? Yeah, it is, Charlie, but I can tell you very honestly, I don't feel like I've done it yet. I mean, I look at Anthony Hopkins, and I look at the movie Remains of the Day, and I go, where's that part? Where's a movie like this that I could go to? why am I not even seeing these kinds of these scripts? Why do they never come close to me? So this was sort of my my take on sort of Dennis is looking at the breadth. Everyone's looking at the breadth of his life. I mean, every talk show he sort of went on after he was clean and sober, they're just like, it's amazing. Like, how did you even like live through any of this? And so Dennis sort of does his confession, but then after looking at the breadth of this career with so many ups and downs, I mean, Dennis really delivers like this terrific line, which is just like, you know what, Charlie, I just haven't done it yet. You know, I thought that was just a terrific line, and it sort of.
He's always performing.
He's always performing, which is sort of unnerving about him. But so maybe Lily, you want to read something of yours and.
Yeah, well, of course, the Astronaut Wives and Dennis Hopper. I don't know if they meld very well, except that they were written in the same New York City loft, basically, and slept side by side. Every time I would tell the Astronaut Wives, who are about 30 women who are scattered across the country today, I'd say, well, what does your husband do? Oh, he's a writer. Oh, that would really scare them. Well, how do you guys survive, et cetera? And then when they ask, well, what's he working on? And I would say, well, he's doing a biography of Dennis Hopper. I mean, this is totally the antithesis of their lives, which were red, white, and blue. But why I found them such a fascinating cast of characters where the book starts with the Mercury 7 astronauts who were revealed to the country on April 9th, 1957. And they're sort of sitting at a table like this in Washington, and John Glenn, Gus Grissom, these amazing American heroes, and all of you are, per se, the reporters interviewing them, and they think they're all going to be, being prided on their valor and that they volunteered to do this very dangerous thing. And basically what the reporters want to keep on knowing is, well, what does your wife have to say about this? She's going to let you be shot up there into outer space? And so that very day, reporters were dispatched across the country to go meet the Astro Wives. And this is not a term I came up with, but that they were called that in headlines in the day. And so I really see the Astronaut Wives as, in a way, our first reality stars. And starting when the astronauts are selected, Life magazine, there was an auction for exclusive access to the astronaut family's stories. And Life magazine won this auction. They bought the rights for $500,000, which was a huge amount of money at the time, especially for military families. And all of a sudden, these women are given this equally, I think, difficult task of sort of being the PR face to the astronauts. And this is not always easy because the women are living in the space burbs, as they were called, outside of NASA's operations in Houston. Their husbands are training at Cape Canaveral, later Cape Kennedy. They have groupies known as Cape Cookies. These guys are being followed around like the Beatles. But I want to read a portion that's not all apple pie and vanilla ice cream, which was the image that the wives had to portray, but a little bit about a reporter named Dodie Hamblin, who was embedded in the astronaut families' homes and sometimes was very frustrated with her all-American assignment. Living in Togethersville, as it was really called, happily trapped in the 50s, the wives might have been on birth control pills, but they were still buying the clean-cut, all-American image 100%. Barbara and Gene Cernan had actually walked out of the prime seats they'd been given to the free love rock musical Hair, which had just opened on Broadway because it featured nudity and sex. They thought it was un-American. The wives didn't even seem to know that America was in total upheaval. Students had taken over Columbia University. The militant Black Panthers had hijacked the civil rights movement, and radical feminists had emerged from the women's liberation movement. In June, Valerie Solanas of Scum, her society for cutting up men, had shot Andy Warhol. Though they all had plenty of cans of Campbell's stacked in their cupboards, cream of mushroom soup being a key ingredient in casseroles, most of the wives probably didn't even know who Warhol was. And forget radical feminists, what about plain garden variety feminists? Were any of the wives up on the current literature of the burgeoning women's movement, from the feminine mystique to Gloria Steinem's Playboy bunny expose, and also the more mass-produced fare? Who couldn't help but admire Helen Gurley Brown's Cosmopolitan? As its editor-in-chief, Brown claimed women could have it all, love, sex, and money, while also advising them on beauty treatments that were quite a bit more modern than the Edna Wallace Hopper white clay mask. Spread semen over your face, one of Mrs. Brown's pieces advised. It's probably full of protein, as sperms can eventually become babies. Makes a fine mask, and he'll be pleased. Sometimes Dodie, the life reporter, wanted to scream. It felt so outdated and claustrophobic here. Togethersville can be a warm and loving family, she typed up for life, or just a great gelatinous blob that closes around and smothers the individual. Docking her canoe, Dodie found her way. This was how she traveled around the space burbs that were connected by Clear Lake. Docking her canoe, Dodie found her way to Frank Borman's newly mown lawn. The two teenage Borman boys, 15-year-old Ed and 17-year-old Fred, were huge. Frank greeted her, and Susan offered her a drink. Frank was just about to be the commander of Apollo 8, which was going to be the first mission to orbit the moon with 3 crew members going around. Knocking back around and gesturing flamboyantly with her cigarette holder, Dodie was a charming guest, offering them the use of her apartment should they ever visit New York. That was clearly the wrong thing to offer Frank Borman. The Bormans weren't like their sophisticated best friends, the Collinses. Mike and Pat, Mike, of course, being the one who flew Neil and Buzz later to the moon, were connoisseurs of French wine, readers of literature, and lovers of those old and dirty and crappy cities, as Frank deemed Chicago and New York. Frank felt very much at home here in Clear Lake City. He tolerated Houston because it was a new, clean city. He even communicated in his own home via telephone, which Dodie found surpassingly bizarre. Frank called upstairs to the boys to ask, inexplicably, permission to use their car to drive to a restaurant. Could I borrow it, please, pal? Ed, or perhaps Fred, said okay. At Eric's Pub on the banks of Clear Lake, they were shown to the best table by Helen, the maitre d'. She lived in an old houseboat tied up outside. Princess Grace and Prince Rainier had recently lunched there, which pissed off Frank to no end. He'd been asked to meet them, and as a result had missed an important meeting at NASA. Over local specialties, Frank regaled Dodie about the future of NASA. When it became all about science, it was no longer about test flying. It wouldn't interest him anymore, he declared. He only liked the flying part. When we get to the moon, swore Frank, I'm getting out. He also shared his feelings about how the entire country was going to hell. There were no winds of change blowing at the Bormans. Frank couldn't stand the long hair the boys wore. It made a man look like a girl. Hell, if he got down to it, he couldn't stand long hair on a female. Dodie was relieved to paddle toward home, a new apartment complex in Nassau Bay. From the middle of Clear Lake, she could see the space burbs all around her, so quiet, so isolated from the rest of the world. She paddled home as the moon rose over Togethersville. Perhaps what was going on here was more important historically than the war in the Congo or the riots in Paris or even the throngs of hippies wandering around Haight-Ashbury, sleeping in Golden Gate Park. Dear God, this was where the 60s was happening, or for that matter, the 20th century, the millennium. Certainly the cavemen who beheld the mysterious moon never thought about meeting the Beatles, nor would the computer-enhanced beings who might someday inhabit outer space. So...
There it is, creative nonfiction. But, I guess it's just... you sort of, I guess, you got to have an instinct when you, like, what really draws you to a story, I think, when you're looking at nonfiction, because, I guess if you don't, if you're not nonfiction writers, as opposed to just like, well, yeah, it's just, you just tell the story. It's a nonfiction story. I mean, this happened, and you tell it like it happened, and then you're sort of done with it. I mean, but you really do need to have some sort of blinders, because you're writing a book, you're writing a narrative, it's a story, and so you don't really you can't just go all, you could theoretically go all over the place, and I've done that in earlier drafts, and it's just, at some point it really is just, you're just putting information down, really. You're not really writing a book. So that's the trick. It's just sticking with that. And usually the good thing is that, you have an original vision for the project for, you're looking at like, oh yeah, it's going to be about the wives. It's not going to be about the technical side of NASA, but it's going to be about, the domestic side. And like Lily at points, she was, you could tell your Marilyn Lovell story. That's,
Which one?
About Jim going around it's like, how many times did Jim
Oh,
go
right,
around
right.
the
Oh, yeah. Well, I was very intimidated when I first started writing the Astronaut Wives Club, because I thought, wow, I'm not really a self-proclaimed space geek. I've met many of them, at Space Fest, which is this annual exhibition every year in Tucson, where all the astronauts come and, sign autographs, even for the fans today. But my background is writing for the New York Times, writing another book. I'm not technological at all. Usually our only fights, me and Tom, are when our printer stops working, and Tom tells me he's not technical support. So I was very intimidated because I started reading all these space books. I'm like, how am I ever going to understand orbital rendezvous, So it was cute. One of my first meetings with Marilyn Lovell, who's married to Jim, who, of course, was played by Tom Hanks in Apollo 13, and they're sort of space royalty. We were sitting in her house in Lake Forest, and the Astronaut Wives Club really was a huge production of going around the country and meeting 30 women together and individually and collecting their stories, which they'd never told before. So at one point, Jim, I hadn't met him yet. Marilyn had sent him off for the day so we could have some alone time. And so he was just about to come back, and I said, Marilyn, how many times did Jim go around the moon again on Apollo 8? He was one of the first 3 humans to orbit the moon over Christmas Eve, 1968. And she looked at me and she said, I don't remember. You'll have to ask Jim. And I thought, whew, okay, I'm with the right group of women, because we're really going to get down to sort of the emotional side. I'm going to push away most of the technological elements of the story and really focus on questions that fascinated, I think, the public since back then, and which oftentimes, because the astronauts being engineering types, couldn't really get down to. The joke was always, Life magazine, I've read all these memos. It's like, we don't want another technological story. We want a human interest story. Ask Neil if he's had any dreams while he was on the moon. Ask him what it smelled like, what it felt like. Did it make him think about his love for his wife? And so you see then these press conferences where reporters are trying to get Neil and Buzz and any other astronaut to talk about the feelings behind what they're doing. And they're just sort of spouting numbers and vectors. And it's just like, oh, forget it. I'm going to go talk to your wives.
And Lily, you actually got pretty good at the technical stuff. You were spouting out, like, I don't know the acronyms anymore, all that stuff. But it's like, I was like, you gotta calm down.
I think I've repressed it, but it's in the book.
But it's like, you always do come back to, it's just good to sort of go there a little bit and then, figure it out. But then you always have to sort of, it's just nice to come back to that original vision through editing, because that's really like in a 2-3 year process of writing your book. You always have to remember what got you juiced around that story to begin with, and the hope is that you end up sort of with like a work as opposed to just a lot of information on a page. So I'd say that's what we've been sort of trying to do with nonfiction. But
well, for a long time, I think my sort of thesis for this book was, that the wives had to present this Stepford Wives image, that the whole country was being sold on, that the Cold War effort to, put man into space, America into space, wasn't only about the technological feat, but also about presenting that Boy Scout, Girl Scout image, which we all think about when we think about NASA. And really, it wasn't the case with these guys, and the wives had to put up with a tremendous amount, which is revealed in the book. But you were always talking about how Dennis Hopper wasn't just a story about the actor, but about this chase for the American dream. And for the longest time, I didn't even know what you were talking about, you know? But I think that it comes through in the pages. But maybe you could share a little bit about your adventure when we went to Dodge City and sort of how you came up with that thesis and the trains.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was, you throw sort of I guess when you're starting a story, really when you're writing a proposal to get the book deal, to get the book, it's like, you just use your first instinct. It's like, throwing the dart and see where it hits. It's like, all right, that's your basic guide, and like how to get, I knew it was something, I was like Don Quixote going after the American dream, but then my editor kept being like, what do you mean by the American dream? I'm like, the American dream, it's the American dream. And I was like, actually, I have no idea, I don't know what it means. And so finally, I started backtracking, and I was like, okay, what does it mean for Dennis? And Lily and I, we snuck into like we were in Dodge City, Kansas, and she somehow got the key from somebody somewhere.
From a real
we just sort of
estate
rolled into
agent.
town, and like we got the old Dodge Theater, and we went
Which
in.
is the cutest, quaintest old theater. It's, red velvet, tiny little theater with flash bulbs lighting up the place. And
it
it's a real
was,
ghost
but then
town.
we went in, and then it was totally terrifying. It was just like this moldy like tomb. I mean, we peeked in, it was totally freaked out. I was like, we gotta get out of here. But anyway, the whole thing was, this was, you look back at Dennis, and the one thing that he keeps talking about was, how his grandma on the little egg farm outside of Dodge City,
Where he grew up.
Yeah, where he grew up. She would, take the eggs from the chickens, and she put the eggs in her apron, and they'd walk to town, and they'd sell the eggs, and this is where, and they'd buy movie tickets. And so, first of all, it was like, we met someone in Dodge City. It was Dennis's, like, I don't know, like
His aunt.
second cousin,
Oh,
I
right.
think. And she was like, well, Aunt Nellie, I heard that story, but she would never, why would she ever put eggs in her apron and walk them to town? That's just like a long way. And I was like, I don't know. And then Lily and I, one day we were watching, I don't know, this is totally weird. We decided we'd try the Pink Floyd thing with Wizard of Oz one night. And so the idea is like, you play Dark Side of the Moon and you watch the Wizard of Oz, and it's supposed to like strange
How many
things.
people here have done it?
Anyway,
Anyone?
so
Okay.
literally,
Okay.
like when we first did this, like I was like, the first scene, it's like in the Wizard of Oz, it's like Annie M is putting these eggs in her, in her apron, and I was like, this is what Dennis is going for, like this,
Self-mythology of
and
the
so,
movies.
but his story continues. He's like, he buys the, he gets the tickets with the eggs, and then he looks up on the screen at the Dodge Theater where we went to, and he sees like these cowboy movies, and he was finally like, Dennis used to like look at he literally, and we saw his farmhouse. I mean, it was really like right by the tracks, and so he'd see the trains going by, right outside of his home, and he would talk about he always wondered where the trains went, and then he had this sort of epiphany when he was watching a movie, and he was saying, well, this is where the trains are going. It's like they're going to where they make the cowboy movies.
He wanted to live his life like a movie.
Yeah, and so that was his dream, and it was just like, that's the American dream for him.
Which is
it's
the
like
American dream for so many people.
Like, you're that cowboy riding off in the sunset. So, it takes, it was figuring out that, and once I sort of sealed that, then I think I started writing a lot quicker. After that, I started forgetting his great-grandfather's, Black Grove, and I started moving forward with his life. But you guys have any questions? Maybe we sort of open it up.
I just thought it was interesting that the era that you're writing about is before your time, but not way before your time. So what brought you to do something like that?
Well,
I think we're both a little obsessed with the past, right? I mean, we're not mired in it. Well, now we've gotten to sort of relive
Yeah.
it through these books, Now we're ready to move into,
well,
the
it was sort
future.
of, maybe it
but
was sort of, it was probably, serendipitous in the fact that, your first book was,
my first book was about the 1930s.
yeah, and then she found this diary, and it sort of led her to this, wow, it would be great to write about this
Well,
world.
it was almost finding that diary I always think of it as like this little red leather door into the past, and that's really how I became a writer, was like this traveling back into time through this young woman's diary. And, it made me very interested in stories and lives, and stories of lives that wouldn't necessarily have been told, like that story of the diary, which was really a rescue mission. And the wives were sort of a similar thing. I had a professor at Barnard who would always talk about, she was very eccentric, and she had a picture of Gertrude Stein, the Pablo Picasso print of Gertrude Stein over her desk, and she would always talk about how the important stories are often found in the margins and in diaries, and how you have to give voice to the voiceless, etc. And this was kind of one of those projects, and oftentimes it's like going back into time to find these lost stories which need to be revealed, at least for me.
I mean, mine was the opposite experience yours is sort of heartfelt and sweet, and wow, you found this serendipity. Mine was like, I got drawn into this sort of the dark side, with this notorious heroin dealer from the 70s, like sort of, that movie American Gangster with Denzel. Well, this is a guy that's in that movie. It's Nicky Barnes, who was the most notorious, crime kingpin of the 1970s. At large. And so this guy was in sort of witness protection, and I was working for this publishing company, and they'd gotten in touch with them, and
you were the editor of the book.
I was the editor for the fourth writer on this project, and then finally I was just like, all right, I'm going to do this book. Like, it just wasn't working out with any other writers, so I took over that, and I sort of got into the real minutiae of a specific time and place in the 1970s, which was this really, if you look at it in New York City, it was sort of, if you can't call it a golden age of crime, it was definitely like in the 1960s and 70s, things were so sort of lawless then that you could get away with a lot more than you can get away with now.
Well, I think there's also something that's like in the background of our daily musings, which is, and I think it is for everybody, just that contemporary life is so transparent, and everything is sort of being like cleaned out and shaved down and raised down, and the really great thing about stories are like the grit and the unpolitically correctness, and so oftentimes going back to the past to find a story, they're more dramatic then.
You bring new life to it, especially since we didn't really live in it. You sort of see it with fresh eyes.
Can you answer Jerry's question about how Dennis became so conservative?
Oh, Dennis, he was, how did he become conservative? Because, this is the guy who's, he's easy rider guy. He's sort of the ultimate hippie there. But I think it has something to do with, it's like that Marlon Brando thing from The Wild Ones. It's like, what are you rebelling against? And he's like, what do you got? And I think there was something with Dennis that he was just so, like, against the grain that it might have had something to do with the fact that he's sort of in cool liberal Hollywood, and all of a sudden he's just like, forget this, I'm going to vote for George Bush, like twice. So it has to do with that, but he was also a gun nut. He loved guns, and he was also just, the guy's from Kansas, So I just think it could just be reverting to more of his
But it's not just him.
roots.
Talk about his merry men of golfers.
Oh, right. Well,
they're all a little strange.
yeah, it's sort of a weird. There's a part in the book about I found out who he played golf with. His quartet was Dennis Hopper, Bob Dylan, Neil Young, and Joe Pesci.
On the golf course.
Which is like amazing to think about these guys, but like, just think, why does Dennis love golf? We sort of, I don't know. The family didn't exactly want this story to be told from me, and so we ended up Lily and I, we sort of snuck into basically everything, memorials. I got thrown out of the funeral. It's a lot of stuff.
So did Peter Fonda.
But so did Peter Fonda. That's you'll read the book and you'll find out that. But when we were sneaking outside of the memorial service in Santa Monica, all they were talking about was Dennis's golf game, and I was just like, that's really odd. This guy. he made Easy Rider. I mean, he really shaped a vision of America. I mean, this is in the I mean, this is Library of Congress. Put Easy Rider is one of the most significant films. You're talking about like his golf game, like his amazing golf, and so it was weird just to see what happened to some of these characters. But I mean, who really knows why he did it? And I think everything that Dennis did, he did it with a lot of. I mean, he's acting. I mean, he did a lot. He loved like sort of live theater, and he was also really confrontational. And so I think that probably has a lot to do with his political bent.
When you're writing biographies, do you find that you have different people give the different interpretations of the event, and then how do you decide how to present that in your book, and who's right or
right? Well, I probably have a better example of that than Lily offhand, but my thing was it's the chapter in which they first go down to New Orleans to film Easy Rider, and this is when this is before. I mean, this is just like two guys, Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, and they're like, let's go make a movie, and they get a little bit of money from someone gives them some money, and they go down and start shooting in New Orleans in the middle of Mardi Gras. I mean, it's total chaos, and so I was able to, I got in touch with probably, a lot of people. Among them, Karen Black, who passed away recently. She was, one of the New Orleans sort of bordello whores. I talked to Tony Basil, the other, one that also was playing sort of alongside.
She's Billy's
Karen
girlfriend.
Black. Yeah. I talked to Peter Fonda. I talked to to Les Blank, he's a documentary filmmaker, but then he was like on second camera and he was just shooting around. Talked to like the sound guy. I mean, I talked to a lot of people just to figure out, what was going on. And then I looked at like Terry Southern's old papers in the New York Library. Because he was there and
he wrote part of Easy Rider.
He wrote. I mean, but the thing is, there's just so much controversy since then because Easy Rider had made so much money that no one expected it would. I mean, it was like they hit the jackpot, and it was like who wrote what, who had what to do with this, and I think a lot of impressions were. First of all, they were colored by the fact that everyone was like they were high or on, they're totally on LSD, in the middle of Mardi Gras in 1968. I mean. And then a lot of motivations of why people are telling you what they're telling you, and is it self-serving, is it not? And so what you kind of have to do is you sort of have to toss the stuff that you think that your instincts tell you is just
BS.
Yeah, like Hemingway talks about, you have to have a really good bullshit monitor, which you do, and you pretty much toss that. But the other stuff, you can't really come with a definitive. I mean, my solution was just put it all in there. So I just put it all in this New Orleans chapter, and I thought it was made of really manic and crazy, and all these people running around. You get the sense of
sometimes you go with it like a tumbleweed.
Yeah,
because sometimes it is just all these impressions, and there is truth in everybody's memories, and you sort of patch it together.
Well, that's what it is, and I think that my thing is that I believe that, especially when you're talking about with someone like Dennis, and at the beginning of the book, I have the Christopherson quote. It's he's a walk-in contradiction, partly truth and partly fiction. Not that I want to make this thing fictional, but the idea was that it's sort of like greater truths, especially when you're talking about someone like Dennis. You have to just what I always liked was people that knew him. They'll read the book and they say this is Dennis, and that's different from reading a book really about Dennis and just reading sort of the facts. So what's important to me is you have to sort of roll with it a little bit. And when you're talking about someone like Dennis, when he's telling his stories, he might be sort of, embellishing just that much, of course he's embellishing. He's telling great stories. But I didn't think my job was to be judgmental and say yes, this is true, or no, this is not true, Dennis. Shame on you for telling that. It's just you have to sort of present this portrait. And that's what I really wanted to create, was a portrait rather than just, the dried Wikipedia
And
facts.
in one case, there's a very famous story about Dennis being blackballed from Hollywood early on in his career, and Dennis basically recounts this like showdown with this grizzled old Hollywood director.
Yeah, Henry Hathaway. You know, it's a
And-
3-day showdown in the desert.
But then when you talk to his co-star, he said, actually, that's not what happened. Like, Dennis, like, you know, brushed himself off and he did the shot finally. And there was never this showdown. So Tom, at that point in the book, instead of saying, like, well, it turns out this is not exactly true, it's like he makes a fork in the road and you get both versions. You get the version from Dennis and the play-by-play of that, and then you get this, like, alternate version from the leading actor.
Yeah.
So it's almost like pick your own adventure reader. Like he sort of leaves it up to you. But I think both of us feel pretty strongly about not putting like a moral judgment on the people or the situations that we're writing about. I mean, I'm personally not interested in that.
No, I mean,
I'm
you just gotta-
interested in the story and telling it in a really new and interesting light.
What was the Astronaut Wives Club more clear cut about there weren't so many?
Well, it was, no, probably it's as complex, but simplified in a way, which is that my subjects are like, you know, high-level military wives. And so to get them to really tell the truth about their experiences is a matter of convincing and prodding and come on, tell me some more. The public's going to love you more for
real
it.
man.
You know, and with a pastiche of 30 women, you get some women who are like, listen, you know, he was awful after he came back to the moon. Here are our divorce files. Look through them. I hate him. He's a terrible father. Other women who are still married, who are still the gracious Navy wife. So it was sort of figuring out their code, I guess, the code of the military wife, and how to crack that while still remaining someone that they could trust, because after all, they had kept mum about their story for, you know, 50 years, and they finally felt comfortable with me to tell it. So I didn't want to backstab them in any way either. You know, I felt that this was a redemptive story that we hadn't heard about the astronaut wives, and sort of in a feminist light as well, you know, this untold story. So I wanted that to be a good experience for them as well.
Well, I don't know what happened to the flapper dress.
Oh, the flapper dress. Well, I still have the flapper dress. We used to live with a couple of the trunks, but Tom's more minimalist than I am, and
Yeah, I had to
they've-
haul them up five
they've
flights
since
of steps.
they've since gone on and had another life of their own. But you know, usually when we get into a new project, it's like it's a big spring clean, and you know, we just have to live in a different era. But no, I still have the flapper dress, and I wore it, and there are pictures of me on the internet wearing it. We live in Manhattan. Oh, we live in Soho.
I was just wondering, what are you each working on now, if you're working on new projects?
Well, now that we're on a panel for creative nonfiction, we're actually doing fiction.
Both of us.
I mean, a break. I mean, we've
We're
done.
trying to sort of close out this era of our lives, or just for the time being.
Yeah, I
'cause
mean,
it's
let's
so,
come back to nonfiction. But.
nonfiction is so frustrating, I think, for two people who really have a very strong creative impulse. And sometimes we talk about feeling like, you know, fiction
I mean, it's
writers
a-
trapped in
yeah.
non-fiction
I mean,
writers'
it's also a really
bodies.
good limitation too.
No, it
I
is.
mean, it's, you know, it's just a different sort of thing, and it's just sort of just changing up a little bit.
But we're very superstitious, and we don't talk about the actual ideas.
It sounds like you really know each other's work well. How do you share as you're going along? Do you help each other write?
We share. I mean, it's good to have, like, you know, we're pretty honest. I mean, it can get
Brutally
really
honest.
It can get awful. I mean, but
I have these iPhone pictures of Tom reading my first draft, and they're like, and then like, I just remember what he said while I was taking those pictures. He was like, "Is it all like this?" I was like, "Yeah, I think so," you know. But actually, it was a good night because I remember I was like, okay, I'm just starting over. And then I started writing it again. And then you're like peering over my shoulder. You're like, this is good. Why weren't you doing this before? This is good, you know? So.
Yeah, there's some spillover, but
I
it's
wouldn't
good.
say we're competitive at all, but
No, we're
we
both trying
like
to just get it
trust
done.
each other's edits,
Yeah.
which is helpful.
You working in the same room, or?
No, I mean we keep some demarcations. You know, it's just kind of...
How'd you two meet?
Oh, book party. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a 20th anniversary for Bright Lights Big City at Odeon, and I was a gossip reporter for the Times. They had this column called Bold-Faced Names, and I'd be dispatched by night to go to all these fabulous parties, which of course I get totally sick of, you know, and it was very jaded, sort of. Though it was really nice having free champagne and hors d'oeuvres at night. And then I saw Tom across the room, and
There you go.
that was it. He was a book editor then, and either of us hadn't written books, and
And then she got no way. Then I got sort of the first book, and then you got yours shortly after. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then we both hit it about the same time.
In writing nonfiction, do you ever come to a point where you're thinking, you're just really dull? Why am I like doing this? Or did you ever find that with your topic that you just kind of?
No. You have to go through that before, like, you embark. I mean, you got to think, like, how am I not going to get sick of this? And I think part of it is, I mean, I think the real answer to that is that it has to be something else. I mean, something you can't get sick of. And for me, like, one thing that I never get sick. Well, first of all, I was like this the idea of like Dennis Hopper in America, just like this guy's trajectory, like hurling himself forward into what's happening in America. Like, no matter, I got really frustrated with Dennis a lot, and sort of, just.
But it was
a little
like that
sick of him.
constellation
But
of
but you
James Dean was his mentor. He bought the first Warhol soup can. He tried to blow himself up with dynamite in the desert. I mean, it was like this uncanny.
So I mean, I really never got tired of the story. As frustrating as Dennis could be, as angry you'd get at him, which is good though.
And
I
you
mean,
would get very angry at him.
I would. And I just think you put that in the stuff too. But you really have to think about. That's where like greater themes really come in, and themes that you'll never really get sick of because you find them sort of endlessly fascinating.
Along the same lines, obviously research can go on forever.
Yeah.
When do you know to stop and start writing?
Probably about, I mean, I don't know, I'd say a good, roughly probably 3 months. I mean, I think you do usually we take about a month and do your, meet the people and like go around for like a month and you meet your players, and you can do some pickups on the, later on, but you really need to have like your bulk in the first month, and you have to sort of get your all your papers in line and just your research in line, and you have to do all that. But
then
you need
have
to start
remember
going.
You're not writing a master's thesis, that it's
Yeah.
like a living, breathing work.
Yeah.
And you just have to dive in the middle of things. Sometimes when you're ill prepared to begin with, you have to fill in things later.
Yeah, I mean, just get stuff on paper. I mean, I know the first thing I wrote on the book was that New Orleans chapter of Easy Rider, because I had all these. I was like, I've got as much as I'm ever going to get on this chapter, so I just started writing that one. But that was like a good. I don't know. That was a good 3 months after. So I think that's probably a safe number.
And the first chapter I wrote was actually my first chapter, and it's when all of these wives, as I said, are like becoming our first reality stars. And one is at the grocery store, and a flock of reporters chase her down and interview her kids in the living room. This is Betty Grissom, who's like this little country mouse Hoosier girl. And I remember gleaning together that scene from what she told me, what I read in Life magazine and the newspapers that covered her then. And then just recently, about 2 months ago, I was being interviewed on CNN, and they had this clip from that day where the reporters are actually in her house. It's a television clip. I'd never seen it, and yet it was exactly how it appeared to me and how I hope I conveyed it in the book. Somehow you also get so into that era with even the facts at hand, you're able to build the story. Even when, you can't have everything anytime.
It's just becoming like, I mean, the real goal is like, and sometimes it takes a draft to do this. I mean, you just have to become like so comfortable with the story. It's like you're sort of writing as opposed to just checking like, oh wait, is that true? Is that not? I mean, you're always going to have some of that, but the idea is just that you're fluid enough to where you feel it's like your story, and that takes a while just to really let everything just sink in. So then you could be, then your writing just doesn't get so stiff. It could be really fluid.
Well, I think
she had a question.
One question, yeah. In back, and then we'll send books.
I have a question for Tom. When were you fascinated by Hopper at some age, or just tell us what triggered your interest and when?
I mean, Hopper. I mean, I remember like when I was in college and I was watching Apocalypse Now, and I thought like I'd never seen anybody on the screen that seemed so dangerous. And then I forgot about Hopper. I never really had an Easy Rider like love in college. I wasn't really into it. And then it was just a matter of when I started writing about these '60s gangsters for a while, and then I saw Hopper in the light of like this sort of Hollywood outlaw, and then I started just picking up bits and pieces of his story about he knew James Dean, he was in Rebel Without a Cause, that he bought one of the first Andy Warhol soup cans, and all this just I mean, like, what is going on with this guy? And so, I mean, I've always liked the whole counterculture thing. I mean, my book before was about Crazy Joe Gallo, who was sort of a beatnik gangster, if there's such a thing, which there was.
He's the subject of the Bob Dylan song,
it's like
Joey.
he just Dennis just hit a lot of those counterculture notes, and I just came to a story, not being the greatest Dennis Hopper fan in the world, but just knowing that his story was incredible and it would make a really literary, lyrical book.
Now, there is a Dennis Hopper Foundation, correct?
Yes.
And didn't they just recently auction off parts of it for like $13 million, the art?
Oh yeah, his art collection was, and granted, this was his third art collection. He'd lost his first in his divorce, which included like plenty of Lichtensteins. I mean, like, he knew all the pop artists, and they all would come through. I mean, he just would get their stuff. And then he lost it a second time, after he bought all sorts of new art with his Easy Rider money, and then the IRS comes and takes us away, in the desert 10 years later. And then he collects like, Basquiat's and all the cool kids of the 80s on his comeback. And so, yeah, he got, I think it was like 17 million.
I went to that auction.
Yeah.
Because you were in the desert.
Yeah, it was.
So Lily, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now, your uncle is Ted Koppel, correct?
No.
He's not. Sorry.
But I'm asked that all the time.
I'm just going to ask if he read your manuscript.
Absolutely.
Yes, Uncle Ted is a great supporter.
Teddy, as we call him.
Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.